This video will have a look at AO3 for Streetcar Named Desire. This video will look at A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams with a particular focus on context. So for most of your exam boards, that will be AO3. And in English A-levels, normally that comes up as a weakness for students in terms of students tend to look at AO3 and the contextual information in quite a simplistic way, and it's tagged on or it's not thought about as critically as students are often able to do for language analysis, for example. So this video is aimed to just think critically about some of the context, in particular around Blanche and the context of what it was like in the American South when Blanche was growing up and when this play was set. So first of all, really important to note that Tennessee Williams wrote Streetcar Named Desire out of a love of the South. And he said this in interviews and articles. He loves the South, and most of his plays are about a tribute to that. Remember that the slave-owning states lost the American Civil War and they felt forced to give up slavery. So these southern states felt that the northern states had forced them to give up slavery before they were economically ready to do so. And then for decades and decades afterwards, and some would argue even now, Black people still were treated as second-class citizens, although they weren't officially enslaved. They had roles that were certainly working class or even underclass roles. And for this reason, Blanche is surprised and uneasy when she arrives in New Orleans and she sees an easy mix of Black people mixing and socializing with white people. She thinks of Black people only as servants. Stella and Blanche's privileged white background, part of the sort of ruling classes of those southern states, is both celebrated and vilified. So it's really important here not to simplify Tennessee Williams's viewpoint on Stella and Blanche's attitudes, and particularly Blanche's attitudes towards Black people and Blanche's nostalgia of the South. It's really important that Tennessee Williams both celebrates and criticizes Blanche's memories of the South. And the key word here for that is ambivalence. Tennessee Williams is ambivalent about the memories of the South. There's some very, very uncomfortable truths about how people like Stella and Blanche were able to have such a privileged and comfortable upbringing. It was on the back of slavery. However, Tennessee Williams does have this nostalgia for the great American South. In particular, this nostalgia revolves around gentility, the beautiful dresses, the balls and cotillions, cocktails on the veranda. There's a great amount of nostalgia surrounding that. However, Tennessee Williams is aware that this was supported by slavery in the 19th century and a Black underpaid underclass in the 20th century. Something that's really important in terms of context is that Vivien Leigh, a famous American actress, played Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. And then 20 years later, she played Blanche in A Streetcar Named Desire. And Scarlett O'Hara is caught up in the Civil War. And as you can see from this image, she has this luxurious Gentile background where she has a luxurious, privileged life. 20 years later, when Vivien Leigh is older, she then plays Blanche. And a lot of people saw this casting choice as very symbolic that the beautiful, privileged life that Vivien Leigh had as this character has been denigrated, and she has been brought down in order to play the more damaged Blanche in the 1950s. Blanche really importantly says that we are French by extraction. Our first American ancestors were French Huguenots. And there's some real irony here. Blanche admits and is proud of being a descendant of refugees. French Huguenots were Protestant refugees. However, this is part of the sort of the American ambivalence and the American hypocrisy that everybody is derived from immigrants. And yet, the longer that you've been in America, even though you were descended from immigrants, the longer that you've been in America, the better your status as an American seems to be. Blanche also really clings on to this idea of the American South, going back to what I was saying at the beginning about the American South being quite strongly defined by the American Civil War and the fact that they lost and they felt forced to give things up by the northern states. Blanche clearly feels that sort of that bellicose, that war heritage within her. She says to Stella, "You are not the one that abandoned, you are the one that abandoned Belle Reve, not I. I stayed and fought for it, bled for it, died for it. I took the blows in my face and body." It's almost like she feels that she fought a war for Belle Reve. It feels like she's using the imagery of war to describe the legal battles that she fought in order to keep hold of Belle Reve. And of course, Blanche's hypocrisy about being descended from refugees and immigrants extends to the way that she talks about Stanley and the Polish immigrants that Stella's community is now heavily part of. They're something like the Irish, aren't they? Only not so highbrow. So we see this hierarchy of immigrants in America where Blanche feels that the people of French extraction are higher than the Irish, and then the Irish are even higher than the Polacks, as she describes them. Polacks began to, in the later part of the 20th century, begin to be quite a popular term to describe Polish immigrants. But for Blanche, when this play was written, this would have been quite an unusual term to use to describe Polish immigrants, and it derives from Hamlet. In Hamlet, the Polish soldiers are described as Polacks. And Blanche would have been fully aware, and Tennessee Williams used this on purpose because Blanche would have been fully aware of her literary reference here, her highbrow reference by referring to Stanley as a Polack. And he doesn't understand her reference. And in fact, he responds to it quite emotionally by saying how proud he is to be an American. He's this new American man. He's the new immigrant. These new immigrants are going to inherit America. In the next video, I'm going to talk about Stanley and his attitude towards sort of the American dream and masculinity. But hopefully that has brought up some questions and some discussion points there about Blanche and the context in which Tennessee Williams was writing.